Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Let's be honest, if you've been following the headlines over the past few weeks, you've probably heard the same story over and over again. The war is spiraling. The region is on the edge. The United States is getting dragged into another Middle Eastern quagmire. Some commentators are already calling it a disaster. Others are calling it the beginning of a new era of stability. And somehow, both sides sound equally certain. But here's the problem. The war has barely been going on for a month, and yet everyone already seems to know how it ends. That alone should make you pause. Because when certainty shows up this early in a conflict, this complex, it usually tells you more about the commentator than the reality on the ground. So instead of asking whether this war is a success or a failure, let's ask a different question. What if we're looking at this the wrong way entirely? What if this isn't just a war? What if this is a stress test, one that is exposing, accelerating, and reshaping the underlying structure of the Middle East? Now, to understand that, you have to go back not just a few weeks, but about 20 years. For a long time, the Middle East has operated under what you might call a system of managed instability. It wasn't peaceful. Far from it. There were proxy wars, terrorist attacks, regional rivalries, and constant tension. But despite all that, there was a kind of balance. Iran expanded its influence through proxies, but avoided direct war with major powers. Sunni Arab states competed with each other, but never fully unified. Israel maintained military superiority, but stayed partially outside the region's political architecture. And the United States. It played the role of manager, containing crises, brokering deals, and preventing things from spiraling completely out of control. This system had a strange logic. Everyone pushed their interests. No one pushed so far that the whole system collapsed. It wasn't stable in the traditional sense, but it was predictable. And more importantly, it allowed all sides to operate in a kind of gray zone. That gray zone is what's now under pressure. Over the past several years, U.S. policy has shifted in a way that's easy to describe as more aggressive. But that's not the full picture. What's really changed is not just the level of force, but the objective behind it. Instead of managing instability, the strategy appears to be raising the cost of maintaining the status quo. Think about that for a second. If the old system depends on everyone being able to operate in ambiguity, expand influence without triggering full-scale war, then increasing the cost of that ambiguity forces choices. And that's exactly what we're starting to see. Iran can no longer expand influence at the same low cost. Arab states have less room to stay neutral. Israel is becoming more embedded in regional dynamics rather than operating separately. But here's where we need to be careful. It's tempting to look at all this and say, this is a grand strategy, carefully designed, unfolding exactly as planned. That's a very appealing narrative. It makes the chaos feel intentional. It makes uncertainty feel controlled, but reality is rarely that neat. Yes, there are strategic intentions. Yes, policymakers are trying to shape outcomes. But no one, not Washington, not Tehran, not anyone fully controls how this plays out. What we're seeing is not a scripted transformation. It's a pressured system. And when you apply pressure to a complex system, you don't get precise outcomes, you get reactions. Some of those reactions are predictable, others are not. That's why the current moment feels so strange. On one hand, you have missile strikes, drone attacks, and escalating rhetoric. On the other hand, key systems are still functioning. Shipping continues through critical waterways. Communication channels remain open. Regional actors are hedging rather than fully committing. This is not what total war looks like, but it's also not normal tension. It's something in between. A kind of controlled escalation, or maybe more accurately, a partially controlled escalation. And that distinction matters, because it suggests that the goal may not be to end the conflict quickly. It may be to sustain pressure long enough that the underlying structure begins to shift. Now, does that mean this approach will work? That's a completely different question. Because here's the risk, and it's a big one, when you increase pressure in a volatile system. You don't just accelerate change, you also increase the risk of unintended consequences. A miscalculation, a proxy escalation, a regional spillover. Any one of those could push the situation beyond what anyone intended. History is full of examples where limited conflicts turned into something much larger, not because it was planned, but because it wasn't fully controllable. So, the idea that this is all part of a perfectly calibrated strategy. That's where skepticism is not just reasonable, it's necessary. At the same time, dismissing everything as chaos isn't accurate either. Because there is a pattern emerging, the old rules are weakening. The assumptions that used to guide behavior, what actors could get away with, how far they could push, are no longer holding in the same way. And when rules start to break down, new ones eventually take their place. But that process is messy. It doesn't happen through a single decision or a single event. It happens through a series of pressures, adjustments, and reactions. Which brings us back to the present. What we're witnessing may not be a clean transition from one order to another. It may be something more uncomfortable. A period where the old system no longer works, but the new one hasn't fully formed. And in that kind of environment, almost everything feels unstable, not because it's collapsing, but because it's being reshaped. Now layer on top of that something else that's increasingly important in modern conflict. The information space. This is not just a war of missiles and drones. It's a war of narratives, and in many ways, the narrative battlefield moves faster than the physical one. Within days, sometimes hours of any major development, the story is already being framed. Who started it? Who's winning? Who's losing? What it all means. And those narratives don't just reflect reality, they shape it. Public opinion shifts. Political pressure builds, alliances become harder or easier to maintain. In that sense, perception becomes part of the strategy, whether intentionally or not. And just like on the physical battlefield, control is partial at best. Different actors push different narratives. Some are coordinated, others are organic. Some are accurate, others are misleading. But the overall effect is the same. It becomes harder to separate signal from noise. And when that happens, people tend to fall back on something else, not evidence but belief. If you already think the war is a disaster, every piece of information confirms it. If you already think it's a success, you see the same confirmation. Which is exactly why we're seeing such extreme confidence so early. But confidence is not the same as clarity. And right now, clarity is in short supply. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a position where we have to hold two ideas at the same time. First, this conflict is not random. There are real strategic forces at work, pushing the region in a new direction. Second, those forces are not fully in control. The outcome is still open, and the risks are real. That tension between direction and uncertainty is the key to understanding what's happening, because if you ignore the direction, you miss the bigger picture. But if you ignore the uncertainty, you misunderstand the danger. And right now, both mistakes are happening everywhere. Some people see only chaos, others see only strategy. The reality is that it's both, and that's exactly what makes this moment so important. Not because we already know how it ends, but because we don't. And in that uncertainty, the future of the region is being shaped not by a single plan, but by a series of decisions, reactions, and consequences that are still unfolding in real time. So the next time you hear someone say this war is already a failure or already a success, remember this. It's probably neither, at least not yet. What it is a turning point. But turning points don't come with clear labels. You only recognize them after the fact. And right now, we're still in the middle of it. Thanks for watching.